After a 3-9 season, you're expecting an off season of just doldrums, bad news, and just sadness. But on Wednesday night, BC got not just one piece of good news, but two. We're going to get into a transfer and a big name returning to Chestnut Hill on today's Locked On Boston College.
You are Locked On Boston College, your daily podcast on the Boston College Eagles, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On BC, AJ Black here. Happy Thursday, everyone. If you're listening live, happy Wednesday. You know, when you're in the off season, sometimes when you're prepping for a show like this, you're just like, going into the early afternoon. I was going, man, what the hell am I going to talk about? There's nothing going on. And then in the span of the last hour and a half, I've been writing, prepping, changing things, changing scripts, going over, changing graphics, because BC got not just one piece of good news, but two pieces of good news. And we're going to dive into all of it today. And when he heard the news, he had to jump on it as well. Of course, I have with me Mitch Wolf. Mitch, how's it going?
Doing better now. Like you said, two pieces of great news, honestly, for BC football that, again, do actually give us something to talk about. So let's jump right in.
Yeah, so I didn't even know which one to start with, but transfer portal news usually reigns supreme. So let's jump into the transfer portal as Boston College landed their second transfer in the last 2 days with the addition of UCF wide receiver Ryan O'Keefe. Now, this is a transfer from a team that has a good offense. He was one of their leading wide receivers with 150 receptions over the last 2 years. He's used a lot in the run game as well, doing a lot of jet sweeps and things like that. He's from Texas. And where's the connection come from when you hear a guy like this? He played with Darrell Wyatt, their offensive wide receivers coach at UCF. So he's got a connection there, comes to BC. This is a big deal. I mean, BC had some decent wide receivers and guys with good upside, but when you get a guy that comes in with 150 wide catches in 2 years, that's a solid replacement, right, Mitch?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, he's listed at 5'10", 175, so essentially listed at the same exact size as Zay Flowers. Profiles relatively similarly. He's mostly a slot receiver, but can play out wide. They use him in a lot of different ways. Use him on screens, use him on jet sweeps, like you said. Even use him. I think this is kind of the underrated aspect is he does have a lot of experience returning kicks. Yep. And that's something that I think could really help BC because they haven't really been able to get much of anything, or they didn't really get much in 2022 in the return game. 2021, they had some with Travis Levy who gave them some good returns. But getting a guy with O'Keefe's speed is going to be huge because, again, like, you lose Zay Flowers, you're like, okay, like they still have some good receivers coming up. Joseph Griffin, Jalen Gill might be coming back. Dino Tomlin's solid, but you're really going to miss that speed element that Zay Flowers brings. And O'Keefe, again, I don't think he's going to get drafted anywhere near as highly as Zay, but he brings that speed. He might even be, I think, maybe even like straight line, just faster than Zay, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big addition. When I saw the name and I looked up the stats, I was like, okay, let's look at what UCF writers were writing. And I sent this along to Mitch, and I think it was paywalled from him, so you couldn't see it. But a lot of the writers were saying, like, he's going to end up at a blue blood. Some team's going to pay him to come to his school. And the fact that he's at BC, this is the second day in a row that BC's landed, and we'll talk about this later, a recruit, a transfer that's a big deal. And I didn't think, I thought BC would go after some wide receivers, but I didn't think they would get top end talent. That was the big question. The big thing that surprised me about this is a guy that's established. This is a guy that's not like a project. He's done it. And, I'm looking at this picture of him too, and I didn't even write this in the article. I see a big C on his chest. So clearly he's well respected in the locker room as well.
Yeah, and that'll be huge because, next year BC, they've got a lot of guys coming back. We'll get into this later that, played last year, but they're still really young. But getting a guy who's played a lot of college football, and I know UCF is technically still a G5 program, but that you're playing at the highest level of G5 when you're playing at UCF. So he's playing, big time college football, and he's a leader for that team who's had a lot of success in recent years. So getting that guy in the room, and especially a guy that is familiar with the wide receivers coach, is going to be huge. And again, like now you're really just you have no worries with this wide receiver room at all. You've got I mean, the thing that people say about like a wide receiver room is you want like a basketball team. You don't want all the guys to be the same kind of player. Like you have your quote unquote center in Joseph Griffin, who can be your, post up and, get those vertically contested catches. You've got slashers and guys like a guy like Brian O'Keefe, who can just get to the hoop really fast and, just beat guys with his speed. And then you've got guys like Jalen and you kind of can say like, oh, guys who create their own shot or who create yards after catch. That's Ryan O'Keefe. Jalen Gill to an extent. Jalen Gill is kind of a point guard that does a little bit of everything, if you will. And kind of the same with Dino Tallman. Then you still have young guys like Jaden Williams, Lewis Bond, and Dante Reynolds, who we're still kind of figuring out what they can do, but we've seen them produce in flashes.
Yeah, and I think that's important to note too, that there's still some question marks on the depth of like who's coming back and who's not. I mean, just as a note, I've had my sources that I've talked to about Jalen Gill. Last I had talked to them, they said that he didn't know what he was doing yet. He had some options, so he could be a question mark. Of course, Jaden Williams, as many people here know, is a giant question mark. We don't know what happened with him. He just sort of disappeared. Same with Lewis Bond. We don't know what happened with him. He sort of disappeared. So I like that they were proactive about this, because we don't know what's going to happen with those guys. And you go out there and you get, as you said, like a guy that you're never going to replace Zay Flowers, but you get a guy that brings some intriguing intangibles and tangible benefits to your offense. I mean, I'm going to be honest here. A guy with good speed with Emmett Moorhead's arm is something that I think, we're coming off a 3-9 season, but should get you excited about what this offense could do next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the news we'll talk about next is probably even more reason to be excited about the offense next year.
Yeah. So let's get to that in just a moment. And we will, we'll talk about the next big piece of news, which is not a transfer, but honestly, the biggest news probably of the off season. We will get to that in just one moment. Now, you're hanging with some friends and putting back a few drinks. A few becomes a few too many. As the evening comes to an end and people start to head out, you think of calling for a ride. Nah, you live nearby. You can make it home okay. It's no big deal. What are the odds you'll get pulled over anyway? And even so, what's the worst that could happen? Your insurance goes up. You lose your license. You lose your job. You total your car. You kill somebody. Everyone knows about the risks of driving drunk. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, that still doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel while under the influence. That's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on the road to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, think again. Play it safe and plan ahead to get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's forever. Drive safe or get pulled over. All right, Locked On BC, AJ Black. Before we get to our next segment, I want to do another plug here, if you have not done so already. Eagle Insider. I am the editor and publisher. Mitch is on there. He just did an AMA for VIP subscribers today. I've been putting up news and recruiting information. Got some names that you might want to know about for the class of 23 that BC is in on. You can sign up for Eagle Insider, or you can sign up a friend for a Christmas present for 50% off right now. And get this. You get 50% off and Paramount Plus is included in your deal. So if you wanted to watch, I think Yellowstone's on there. If you want to watch the new Top Gun movie, that's on there. You get that all included in your yearly deal. Sign up at Eagle Insider today. That deal is going to be running out soon, so make sure you head on over. Now, we're back. We're talking about this day, a fun day for Boston College. These are the types of off-season days that get me fired up, because you get excited about next season already, and you see where things are starting to fall into place. And this big news, the second piece, is that Christian Mahogany, a guard who missed all of the 2022 season with an ACL tear from a non-football related activity, is returning to Boston College. Now, this news wasn't a complete surprise. We've talked on this podcast about how we assumed that he was coming back, but with Mahogany, it's hard to assume anything, because he'd been teasing and trolling and doing all sorts of things on social media that made it really hard to see what the hell he was doing. But he announced it in a way that kind of fit with what he did all season, which was partially trolling, partially, having a little fun about it. In a video you can check out on our Twitter. at AJ Black_BC. Mitch, you were telling me before the break that you thought this was the biggest news of the offseason. Explain why.
Yeah, so Mahogany coming back is massive for this team because I was texting you about this earlier today that, like, honestly, in terms of who we expected BC's starting offensive line to be going into the 2022 season before Mahogany's injury, all 5 of those guys are back. Like, Ozzy Shapiro is back. Finn Durst can come back. We haven't heard anything to the contrary yet. Drew Kendall is obviously back. Mahogany's now back, and you got Kevin Klein also recovering from an injury, but it was early in the season, so he theoretically should be able to get back in time. Maybe he has to take the spring off. It's a little slow getting back, but he should be able to go week 1. And now you add Kyle Hergel, the transfer from Texas State, who, again, like I said, I'm not. He's jumping up a pretty big level. Texas State was a pretty bad program for the last few years, so it's going to be a big jump in competition. But he has tons of experience. He knows what to do. He knows who to block and how to block them. So if somebody goes down, he can fill in. You're like, oh, he can fill in at a guard spot and be like, okay, we can get by fine. And then you've got guys who are backing up these guys that we talked about who now have a lot of experience. Not a lot for a guy like Jude Bowery, but he has some playing time. You got Kyle Hergel. You got Dwayne Alec, who played a lot. He can play either guard position, and I honestly think he could fill in at center. You've got Otto Hess, who played a little bit more towards the end of the year, and Jack Conley's still a backup. He's still on the team as far as we know. So he can compete for a spot at guard or tackle. There's talk about him getting another offensive line transfer from Miami, Ohio, and Caleb Schaefer. And then you got guys like you don't necessarily want these guys to be playing, but if there's another rash of injury, they at least have experience. You got guys like Jackson Ness, Nick Thomas. And again, I don't really want those guys to be playing because they were not good last year, but at least they're not as raw as they were this year. They at least have some snaps under their belt. So now you're looking at an offensive line 2 deep that is chock full of experience, and bringing Mahogany back helps everyone out because it really helps out Drew Kendall because he had some struggles with adjusting protections. And if you get him, so you have Mahogany on one side of him and you have either Finn Durst or Kyle Hergel, or maybe Caleb Schaefer, he does end up transferring here on his other side. Those are guys who have played a lot of football. Finn Durst not as much because he got hurt and he's been around a while, but you have guys who know what's going on and they can help Drew Kendall develop. It also takes some pressure off the tackles because they will know better how to handle stunts and twists and all that kind of stuff. They will know where to be going. So if a guy like Kevin Klein or Ozzy Shapiro on the edge makes a mistake, the other guys should more often than not be in the right place. So them being in the right place can at least mitigate a mistake from somebody else. And it's not going to be a cascading waterfall effect where if one guy messes up, the entire play is blown up, which we saw a ton of last year in both the run and the pass game. This is huge for BC. We were really worried about this offensive line moving from this season to the next one. And I mean, I know that the guys that are coming back, some of them were not very good. Some of them were up and down, but with the offensive line, sometimes you just kind of have to take your lumps and that's how you learn. And again, based on how bad they were in 2022, it's nigh on impossible for them to be somehow worse in 2023. By just the natural order of things, they have to be better.
Right, exactly. And those are all great points about the line itself. I think the biggest news, as you said, when you get all that clicking, you have to imagine that the run game that was so putrid in 2022 is actually going to have a chance this year.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to get guys like Alex Broom and Pat Garwo who are going to be able to do what they're supposed to do. Because last year, it clearly, you watched those games, you saw what they did. Those guys had no chance.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're running behind Christian Mahogany and guys that now feel a little bit more empowered or a little bit more experienced to do what they need to do, all of a sudden now the offense is a little bit more balanced, and that's and that should trickle through the rest of the game plan.
Yeah, I mean, getting a guy like Mahogany in there, he's a potential NFL. I mean, definitely top first 2 rounds, maybe first round pick next year. You have him replacing a guy, and again, I don't mean to be belittling people, but replacing a guy like Dwayne Alec who has flip-flop between offensive and defensive line. That's a huge difference. And like I've been saying, it's a force multiplier for the entire offensive line. They can all play more confidently. And honestly, I'm sure that they've heard all the smack that we and the rest of the BC community talked about them last year. And I'm sure that in 2023, they're going to come out angry and ready to prove all of us not wrong, but, rewrite the narrative, if you will.
Right. And as they should, like this is their chance to form their identity. This is a chance for them to prove the folk wrong. And now the big question is going to be, well, we have a comment that I need to throw up there right now. You ready?
Mm-hmm. Oh boy. Yep. Hey. Oh, look who it is.
Christian Mahogany just tweeted, I put up on our comment section, I want you to put the word out there that we back up for, that's the great Stringer Bell quote from The Wire.
Which is what I quote tweeted his announcement with. That was the picture that I used. So we're all on the same page here, which is great to see.
Yep. So I think this is huge news for BC. Just everything that we've got, all the news that we've received over the last 24 hours, to me, and we'll get into this in the last segment, I feel like, I know folks are down right now, but there's all of a sudden a sense of hope. There's a sense of, okay, Hafley understood some of the things that they needed to fix. He's addressed a few things. He obviously landed a guy back that some folks thought wouldn't come back, that was destined for the transfer portal. And now things are looking positive. And I think that is all you can ask for when you have an off season like this.
I'm sorry, I zoned out a little bit. I was reading something else. Was there a question?
Okay, sorry, I wasn't saying anything. I was just saying that there's some optimism about this team heading into 2023.
Oh yes, absolutely. Sorry about that. I was like reading something else, so my bad.
And so in our final segment, we're going to look a little bit at Hafley, and I want to talk about the culture that he's setting and kind of the cumulative set of moves that he's made already, setting up for a 2023 season that's already starting to look interesting. We're going to get into that in just a moment. Now, BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From pro football to college bowl season to basketball and World Cup, we got it all at BetOnline.net. If you love sportscasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. I love BetOnline. It's super easy to use. You can find anything that you need there on the site. And, like whenever you want to make a bet, it's super easy to find. I love that they have like prop bets on there. You can get it all on BetOnline. So make sure to head on over to BetOnline, where the game starts. Locked on BC, AJ Black here. We're talking about this big Wednesday for Boston College football, and we're talking positivity here. And John, I'm not going to get into your comment because you're going right down the other road. Any coaching changes? Are we really running back the same staff? I haven't heard anything otherwise, buddy. So we're going to say yes, but we're going to talk about this coaching staff. We're going to talk about Jeff Hafley specifically. I was texting Mitch earlier today, and I said to him, this is the second straight year Boston College has had a player at an elite level. First you had Zay Flowers, then you had Christian Mahogany. That if you were to say, like, if you were just to use college football logic, you would assume that these guys would enter the transfer portal and get their bag somewhere else. And now both of these guys, both of them announced that they're staying with Boston College, and both had the very similar language in terms of, I don't want to leave this culture that they have here. I love this school. I love this program. I feel like even though the results aren't there yet, Hafley is building a culture with this program that is transcending all this NIL stuff. And I believe Friends of the Heights and things like that are going to help address some of that. But I feel like the program itself is setting up a nice base for some success if they can build upon that on the field.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that I'm starting to write an article about, and it's kind of about how Jeff Hafley, one of, I think, the biggest goals that he had or he needed to have when he took over this program was that he needed to kind of, if not change, just shake up the culture, because I think it wasn't in a good place at the end of the Adazio era. You saw some guys leave, and it's kind of been up and down with that department. But, this year, it's obviously a really bad year. And everybody kind of went to the offseason thinking doom and gloom, like all these players were going to leave, all these players were going to hit the transfer portal. And obviously that still could happen. There's still time, but you see tons of guys hit the portal as soon as you can, and then they're gone or they're still waiting to find offers. And you haven't really seen that mass exodus by any means. You saw Jason Maitre leave, and he's been getting a lot of offers. So all props to him. Dracovic obviously leaves because he kind of they were saying, hey, like we want to move forward with Moorhead, and he wanted to go back to Pittsburgh and be with Frank Cincinnati, which again totally fine. And then Dalen Menard hits the portal, and he had taken all of 3 snaps in his BC career.
Mm-hmm.
Am I forgetting anybody that else hit the portal?
Kevin Pine, right?
A guy who didn't play until the final drive of the final game of this season, which was his first action in 3 years of the program. So all the transfers are, I think they're reasonable, and there hasn't been that huge exodus. And you're seeing a lot of these guys who they're older players like, Elijah Jones, Joshua DeBerry, Finn Durstein, Vinny DePalma, like they're older players and they're obviously graduates. They could leave, but as far as we know, they haven't hit the portal, and they're still coming back because they still have eligibility. And for guys that, for a guy like Vinny DePalma, like I don't want to slight Vinny by any means because he's been a very important player for this team for several years, but he's a guy that probably doesn't have a future in the NFL just based on size and athletic ability. And so you think, okay, like he's been playing football for a long time. We obviously have all this information about football and its long-term effects. And I'm saying, you know what, I've got my degrees. I'm good. It's time to hang him up. But it seems like he's still coming back for another year. And that's really good because, like I said, there are certain limitations to his game, but he's a vital leader for this team. He makes a lot of clutch plays in the run game. So, I think that a lot of people, we're very down on Hafley, and I think a lot of those criticisms were extremely fair, but it's encouraging to me that you're seeing that these players are still very bought in on him, the vision that he's selling, and the school and the program in general. And, I think this team obviously has a lot of stuff to fix on the field, but it's good to know that at least in the facility, in the building, outside of the game, that this team is, still bought in and still willing to work together to try to get this thing going in the right direction.
Right. Because if you look at some programs, like if you look at the leaders in teams that have players enter the transfer portal, you look at a team like they're usually teams that don't make a bowl, right? Texas A&M, I believe, is the leader right now. Last I checked, they had like 20 something players in the transfer portal. And yeah, many of them are probably in there because they're talented and can get other places. But I still think that players, as I said, Mahogany would be a big one, and Zay Flowers was another, that, if things are not going the right way, they could have just went for a bag somewhere else, and they didn't do that. And one of the biggest questions I get on Eagle Insider, I have my Ask AJ Anything post, and I feel like the last 3 weeks or last 2 months, AJ, who's going to be the next decommitment? And I'm like, folks, I'm talking to these recruits. They're not going anywhere. Most of them are pretty locked in. Now, BC just lost one, but that had nothing to do with them losing or anything with culture. It was another issue with, looking at other programs. BC, the players want to stay here right now. The recruits want to stay here. They're still buying into Hafley. And I think that's important for folks to realize. While the fans are pissed off as hell, and believe me, I get it. This last year was terrible to watch. 2021 wasn't much better. It had its moments, but it was still tough too. But even with that, the players want to be there. The players want to perform. And, you can say what you will about this last year. You have to wonder, when you get a Mahogany back, you get, the recruit from UCF and Texas State, and I get the sense they're not done. I think they're definitely looking at some other positions. I have to wonder if the chips fall better for BC, if the chips go in the right direction where you don't lose your entire offensive line and twice, basically, once to the draft and once to injury. Will things get better this year? And it's a big question mark, right? I'm not going to go out there and say it's going to definitely get better, but it definitely gives you some hope that it could.
I'll go on record and say, it's just going to get better it should get better by default. Again, assuming you don't have a crazy rash of injury luck, which if that happens back-to-back years, that's crazy. And that is something we've kind of talked about a little bit, but we'll need to talk about it more then. But again, I think now that with the Mahogany back and they're getting these depth players, I think they will be good. But even if they're just back to being like decent and competent, can get some movement in the run game that can at least allow the offense to function at a base level. If they come out and, I mean, they're not playing Clemson, so that's good. So, but like Florida State, who's pretty much always going to be chock loaded with athletes, especially on the defensive line. Like if they have Jared Verse coming back, if Florida State, gives them a lot of problems next year, I get it. Florida State has a really talented defensive line, but they can't be coming out there and getting their butts kicked by, Holy Cross and UConn and Army and Virginia Tech. Like if you can just be like solid to good against those teams and then competent against the rest of them, it's like, okay, that's fine. We can, because the whole thing, I get people were mad at the offensive coordinator for not getting a better offense on the field. But when you're calling these plays, you're thinking, okay, like I'm hoping that they can at least block this, to the bare minimum of their abilities. And sometimes that just didn't happen. You're just like, man, and when you can't block the simple things, you're like, okay, well, I can't call anything that's more complicated because there's no way they're going to be able to block that. And at times, there were times where they had to call those complicated plays just because, hey, listen, we got to try to find a way to stay in this game. And then, disaster struck sometimes. So, we have, I think us as BC fans have a tendency to, vacillate wildly, swing on the pendulum in terms of like hopeful and hope and despair. So, I think now that this is all good news, but, might want to temper it with say like, hey, like, we've been disappointed a lot before, but, we can enjoy this for now, but, let's not run completely wild with this saying like, all right, as the fourth and dude guys say, 12-0 is back on the table or whatever.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I think it's good to have. It's good to have a little bit of a happy medium here, I think is the way to look at it, right? Like instead of, being Debbie Downer all off season, just talking about like, when are we going to fire Hafley? When are we going to fire Hafley? Let's look at, he's not going anywhere. Let's look at what can happen this season. What could be the positive, but hey, we've seen other things that have happened too, that we still should be concerned about, things that he hasn't been able to do. And we can do that too. But, this podcast would be really boring if all we talked about every day is why haven't they fired Hafley yet? Why haven't they fired Hafley yet? That's not our style. That's not what we're talking about. And I think Mitch and I have already talked about, where things stay and, the rationale to and the rationale not to. And that's kind of where we're at with this. So, for now, it's a fun episode and fun to talk about. And I see you all out there listening. And if you have not done so already, if you are one of the people listening, make sure to subscribe. If you want Locked On BC video sent directly to your feed every day, hit that subscribe button. I can't promise you that Christian Mahogany will be there listening and commenting on every podcast that we do, but we've had him on the podcast before and he's over there commenting right now. But we're a fun podcast and I think it's going to be an interesting off season and we're going to get to spring ball before you know it. And we'll get to see some of these guys in action. And there's still more news, I think, in the transfer portal that BC should be getting relatively soon, but we're going to wrap things up here. We're almost at a half hour and I get yelled at when we go over a half hour. So Mitch, where can people follow your work?
You can find me at Mitchell T. Wolf, WOLFE on Twitter. The AMA is actually responding to a comment right now. So, keep going in there because I was able to kind of take somebody's comment and that kind of inspired me to write something. So, keep going with questions. We're kind of having a debate over quarterbacks right now that kind of got away from BC, but whatever, it's fun to talk about. And then, like I said, I will be having that article out probably sometime next week because it's going to be a bit of a longer one because it's going to cover a lot about kind of BC football from I guess more of an esoteric standpoint.
And Christian Mahogany is still out there listening, as you see. Put up another comment.
There we go.
You can follow me on Twitter at AJBlack_BC. I'm the editor and publisher of Eagle Insider, part of the 247 Sports Network. And I'm still laughing at this. This is funny. But we'll be back tomorrow to talk more BC sports. And congratulations. Before I leave, I should probably congratulate the women's volleyball team. Won the NVIC, I believe, over the Drake Bulldogs. So they want to. It's basically the NIT of volleyball. Congratulations to them. I
think they can still get into the tournament, like the NCAA tournament, though.
So, cool.
It's kind of like a precursor tournament, I think. At least that's kind of what I've seen from Twitter. So I could be wrong. I don't claim to be a women's college volleyball expert by any means, but from what I've seen a little bit on Twitter, that this is kind of like a precursor tournament. So
I obviously we're not going to do a whole segment on women's volleyball because I don't know anything about volleyball, but I do think it's appropriate to shout them out for having a big win tonight. So congratulations to the women on that team. So we'll be back tomorrow with more news, analysis, and everything in between. For Mitch, this is AJ. We'll see you again soon. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. See you soon.